Thank you for joining Reducing Wrongful Hospitalisation for Neurodivergent Young People. I'm going to be handing over now to our presenter, which is Amanda, Director over at Great Minds Together. If I could just direct you before that over to the polls. We've got 2 polls today. Would an all-age pathway for neurodivergent youth efficiently support our population? If you could all please answer that. Click on polls at the top and then thank you. And then there is another one underneath. Would a neurodiversity pathway for assessment better meet our population's needs than a diagnostic-led model? If you could all please be answering those, that would be great. I'm going to leave you to it now until we come back for the Q&A. If you could direct any questions onto the chat, that would be great. I'll hand over to you now, Em.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So just to explain a little bit about Great Minds Together for those that are not aware of us, we are a not-for-profit organisation helping to create better outcomes for neurodivergent children with mental health needs and their families. We exist to increase positive experience for children, young people and their families to ensure that the emotional and mental health needs of a child are effectively identified and subsequently met, and to upskill all parents, carers and professionals in identifying need, understanding the need behind behaviour and effectively meeting those needs in a positive and, more importantly, therapeutic way. And our overall aims as an organisation are to prevent wrongful hospitalisation, particularly for neurodivergent young people up to the age of 25, prevent unnecessary police intervention and wrongful criminalisation for the same cohort of young people, and to prevent children entering the care system where possible or supporting to reintegrate them back home with their families and the appropriate support in place. Kelsey, our clinical director and clinical psychologist, will be monitoring the chat today. So if you do have any questions while I'm talking, feel free to pop it in the chat and Kelsey will do her best to answer. So just to give you a bit of an overview of our services, so we've got 5 different core services which form our sufficiency agenda at Great Minds Together. We are the North West Hub for Autism Central, which is a national NHS England programme, which is a peer support programme for parents and carers of autistic people. And we have a residential service. Currently, we have 1 Ofsted registered children's home, most recently registered, and have another children's home which we are in the process of looking at registration. We've got our Tier 3.5 service, which is a specialist therapeutic service supporting children who are at risk of wrongful hospitalisation or step down from Tier 4. And we have our outreach services, which is a full wraparound team supporting families where they have children with additional needs to help them navigate the system. And within that, we provide various support therapies, mentors, and our complex case team, which sits between our outreach service and Tier 3.5 service. Essentially, our outreach and complex case teams are there to prevent Tier 3.5 ever being required. And the complex case team really focuses intensively on children, young people on the DSR register. So there's lots of new data that has recently been released, and I'm going to just talk about some of that today, just to give you a bit of an insight, and many may not be aware of some of the updated data post-COVID, because it has took a long time for new data to come out as a result of COVID, and obviously the differences pre and post COVID, and sort of gathering that data and knowing what data to actually look at. So currently the amount of autistic people without a learning disability detained in mental health hospitals has increased by 105% since 2015, meaning 67% of people detained were autistic in that period of time. The latest Assuring Transformation NHS digital data shows that in December 2023, in total, 2,030 autistic people and people with learning disabilities are in inpatient mental health hospitals in England. 66% of them are autistic. and 200 under 18s are in inpatient units that are autistic or have a learning disability. 95% of these young people are autistic. That is a very fluid statistic though, and that number is changing all the time. It's really difficult to get a snapshot because of things that are moving so quickly in that kind of space at the moment. Those who are neurodivergent without a diagnosis, these numbers will be higher. And we'll be talking a little bit today around the differences between mental health as a result of unmet need versus mental illness, and those differences, and a bit of misunderstanding in the system around those differences, and also potential misdiagnosis for neurodivergent young people, particularly around autism and ADHD, sort of mirrored with trauma and attachment difficulties and various ACE experiences. So just some more data here, which again is very recently released. According to NHS England, 20.3% of children aged 8 to 16 in 2023 had a probable mental disorder. This is similar rates to 2022 and has been a continuation of stable rates seen since 2020. Among 17 to 19-year-olds, the proportion is 23.3%, and 20 to 25-year-olds are 21.7%. That's seen a steady increase since 2012, and further studies show that that potentially is linked and correlated directly to the introduction of the smartphone. And again, there's various research and data around the different sort of brain effects as a result of the amount of information our young people are retaining now, as opposed to what we did. Permanent exclusion has increased nationally across all school types, so that's inclusive of specialist and alternative provisions and pupil referral units. 97% of children excluded from school have an identified special educational need, which is obviously really concerning. Every 15 minutes, a child enters into care, and increasing year on year, there's an average of 38,000 children coming into the care system each year. A quarter of all children in care are persistently absent from school, and parent carer fatigue has increased. 17% of looked after children have a diagnosis of ADHD, as opposed to 3.6% of the general population, which again links to that question around misdiagnosis and the links with trauma and attachment. And one of the biggest figures and quite concerning really is around 3.8 million people were in contact with NHS mental health, learning disability and autism services over the last year, which is up almost 2/5 compared to before the pandemic. And we could drill down into these statistics quite a lot, and there's lots more, which, you know, if anybody wants to kind of know where to look for that, you feel free to get in touch with us. But there's also quite a large proportion of those 3.8 million are 16 to 18-year-olds, and there's a quite significant number of those are 16-year-old girls as well. And there's lots of research around that data. So again, if you want to know more about that information, just let us know. So currently, there is a significant needs gap with children and young people, young adults who are at risk of wrongful hospitalisation, and also wrongful criminalisation or unnecessary police intervention. And we have been doing a lot of work as an organisation over the last couple of years to try and understand this gap, which does seem to be worsening as time goes on. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why we think that's happening, various conversations that we've had with local authorities and ICBs across the country, and lots of themes and patterns that we're seeing as an organisation ourselves, with various referrals that come in from different areas. What we have really is two conflicting legal frameworks, being the Children's Act and the Mental Health Act. And we have a situation where it's currently illegal to place children in any placement that's under the age of 18 that is not an Ofsted registered provision. The Ofsted framework presents with a number of challenges. That there isn't a local authority that I have spoken to that do not agree with the challenges that we kind of see as well ourselves. And a lot of the feedback that we've received with various surveys and conversations and meetings that we've had is around it not being flexible, it being very paperwork focused, not always being therapeutic, quite dependent on inspector. So the people versus process challenge, which essentially we should have one process of things that should work a specific way. but ultimately a lot of the time it does boil down to the people that you're interacting with. So we've seen, even in the last 12 months, a really flexible and understanding inspector that understands the needs gap and understands the flexibility that needs to be presented in the framework and does not penalise providers for that, as opposed to others who are quite more sternly implementing the law that they are required to implement, and being less flexible. So again, it's about those relationships and the people that you're liaising with one representative actually stating, as a human being, I agree with the plan being in the child's best interest, but as an Ofsted representative, I cannot formally agree with it, which is obviously quite a worry when that is the main regulatory body overseeing children, which is meant to be quite child-focused and quite child-led, but actually you can't sort of judge things as a human being because the framework doesn't permit you to do so. So that's something that really needs to be considered and looked at. CQC does seem like a lot more flexible and a lot more in line with understanding the therapeutic approach needed for the children and young people that we support, certainly at this level, and the more complex young people. However, the challenges with that is that CQC registered provision is not recognised as a long-term option for children in care by local authorities or Ofsted, where this would be appropriate to meet their needs. So the system currently around regulation is not individualised or child-centred, essentially, because we have a framework that can be quite punitive and quite archaic, that is kind of pushed as the only recognised and accepted framework for children under the age of 18, whereas we do have another regulated framework that would potentially meet the needs. However, that isn't accepted, and local authorities are quite nervous to place children even in a CQC regulated session if it also doesn't have a dual registration with Ofsted, and then you've got two quite conflicting frameworks in some ways. It works well in some areas and not quite so much in others, but again, all boils down to the people that you're liaising with and the inspectors that you've got, which also needs looking at. An example of this would be one young person that we're aware of was age 13, had 28 placement moves in 18 months in order to ensure a registered placement, because those placements kept breaking down because they weren't meeting the needs and couldn't essentially meet the needs. So in order to try and find a registered placement that is recognised and accepted by the system, they just kept moving that young person, which obviously increases trauma and attachment difficulties and therefore behaviours, to the point where no placement would accept that young person. It got to tier 4 level, and then there was some criminalisation around that as well, wrongfully so. And even though those placements that they kept moving that child to wasn't meeting the needs of the child, but there would be an alternative placement that could. So it's just the way the system is currently set up that we're hoping that we can try and solve. So just to give you an idea of where we sit, really, we've got currently a situation where all the referrals come into the multi-agency safeguarding support hubs. Due to the overwhelming amount of referrals and the need versus capacity currently within social care across the country, a lot of those referrals are not meeting threshold. That threshold is increasing and increasing. And so a lot get referred to early help to try and see if they can support. We view early help as a bit like a colander that kind of catches all those referrals, and actually some that are quite crisis level referrals still. And then the third sector organisations like ourselves and many others are the bowl under the colander that kind of catching all those referrals, because the capacity just isn't there for early help to be able to facilitate all of those referrals that are batted over from MASH. And actually, the referrals that are coming through also to the third sector many years ago, that would be seen as an early intervention referral, preventative measures, that is kind of almost non-existent currently within our system at the moment, due to the amount of difficulties that the children, young people and families in this space are facing. There is generally only two options when a family gets to crisis with their young person, and that is the hospital or the police station. And we've listed there just a few behaviours that may be presenting at that point that warrant those referrals or being placed there. And then obviously hospital tier 4 young offenders institutes, mental health act assessment, section 136s, all of those things to sort of kickstart. When we get to that crisis level, there's not enough placements in the country to meet the needs, and obviously the average 38,000 children coming into care every year, there is just not enough places for them to go. So we've got them in really precarious situations once they get to crisis point, as a result of the not really being a lot of focus now on early intervention and prevention, because a lot of the focus is on the crisis management as a result probably of COVID, but many other things, which I'd be here all day if I started talking about all the reasons behind it, but I think many of us are already aware of that. So we kind of sit here in this gap, which is in between out of parental or local authority control, and to prevent, obviously, wrongful hospitalisation or unnecessary criminalisation. And the Tier 3.5 service that we're providing currently sits between those gaps, but there are some challenges with that which are continuing to increase, which I'll come on to shortly. But that's kind of the gap our Tier 3.5 service sits in, and also elements of our outreach and complex case team. So when you have a young person and they get to crisis, you end up in this cycle where local authorities are putting out placement requests. In some areas this is improved, but in other areas that very much is still present, where you have the health and social care debate. The integrated system and funding systems has started to improve that in some areas better than others. However, you do still have difficulties around the misunderstanding of mental health needs as a result of unmet need or environmental factors and mental illness. So those referrals for mental health act assessments for these children are still happening extremely frequently. I would probably say I am aware of at least 3 or 4 a day currently where referrals come in for mental health act assessments to the NHS. And that is largely linked to that misunderstanding around mental health and mental illness. So usually a lot of hospitals will say doesn't meet threshold for a mental health assessment, or if the mental health assessment carried out doesn't meet threshold for gatekeeping of a Tier 4 bed, and that the environmental factors should be sorted, and that the social care needs to go and find the correct placement to meet the needs of that young person. And that escalates because then the young person is becoming more unsettled because hospital environments are not actually appropriate, certainly for a lot of neurodivergent young people with sensory difficulties. You've also got lots of staff in hospitals that potentially won't be fully aware, educated, or fully understand autism or other co-occurring conditions alongside that. So that's where you get the escalation in behaviours due to that approach not being correct, really in line with the person's needs. The police intervention, usually security guards restraining young people, and then you going round in this circle, and then we've got social care potentially pushing further because the behaviours are escalating for that mental health act assessment, and we've got that pushback from health saying no, there's no mental illness, this is mental health, it's as a result of environmental, and adults around not fully understanding how to meet the needs of that neurodivergent young person. So what we then tend to find is where there is no placement is Dole's orders. So deprivation of liberty orders are applied for, usually via an emergency hearing, in order to risk manage, where there is usually a lot of the time also full capacity. So potentially being used inappropriately. And there's a lot of information. The Children's Commission has just released a lot of information around inappropriate use of Dole's orders, but that's obviously as a result of the other issues within the system, which I'll come on to shortly. This is just a diagram that an ICB created, actually, which is a really good way of describing what that looks like when it gets to crisis level, and that debate between social care and health, and pushing for mental health act assessments and pushback as a result of it being environmental, and the amount of escalation meetings that are taking place, how many people get involved, all the way up to the escalation MDT, where you've got, there's an example here of 22 people. I've been on an MDT of a lot higher, where there's been 40 plus people on an MDT, and largely also people who have never met the young person. I know I was on a meeting with 38 people, once where not one person on that meeting other than myself had actually met the young person that they were talking about making decisions about at that time. So the operational staff are also not included once it gets to that level. And what tends to happen is everybody disagrees. There's so many people from so many different departments, different parts of the system, and then all these little arrows that come out of that escalation MDT box are all those people going away and raising complaints with their respective departments about other departments. And then it becomes more about that and generally elements of ego rather than about the young person and what's right for them and solution-focused approaches. That's just a really good way of giving a visual of what that looks like. And I thought it was a really good way of demonstrating that that's been done one of the ICBs we're working with. So this is overall what we're dealing with currently in this system and the difficulties that we're facing and why. So there definitely isn't enough placements for children at this level in the country. It doesn't line up to the amount of children that are being accommodated by local authorities. But there's a number of laws that are potentially less of a help and more of a hindrance at the moment, because we've got a situation where unregistered placements have been made illegal recently. Many of you will be aware of this. I don't necessarily disagree with that, because a lot of providers that we're operating were unsafe, and I understand the rationale behind it. However, what that did is automatically by default make a lot of specialist placements that kind of fall between that gap and into that needs gap also illegal for local authorities not to be able to place children or young people in when they are struggling. And we've also got a framework for our registered placements that are not meeting the needs of these children, and actually providers preventing admission and not accepting referrals because of the amount of notifiable incidents that come up that affect their rating. They don't want to jeopardise their registration. So the placements that may be available that are registered actually are quite discouraged because the framework does not match and does not offer that flexibility or understanding of the presenting needs and what the environments may need to look like also for these young people for periods of time to be able to effectively support and stabilise them therapeutically. We're also about to look at a prevention of deprivation of liberty orders, which is currently the only route left that can potentially have court intervention to say that we can place these young people here for a period of time while we find the right suitable placement or rehabilitate them home with an intensive support team around their family. And obviously that will be the last area that we can close off. And then there is nowhere else for these young people to go other than hospital and the police stations. But there's going to be an enforcement of the Mental Health Act where the law is around autistic young people, neurodivergent young people not being allowed to be placed in hospitals or mental health units and police stations. So what we've done is we've cancelled out every single area of the system where these people could potentially go, not really understood what's available in the system that might actually be working well, and rather than making certain things illegal, potentially looking at other regulation that can accommodate and understand the flexibility required around those needs. And so we've not got any space for them currently, and we've not made that space. We've cancelled out all of the other spaces but not made a new space. We don't actually know how many children and young people are sat in mental health units, adult mental health units, barges, I believe, hotels I'm aware of, police stations, hotels is a big one, and hospitals, A&E departments, adult wards, because that number doesn't currently exist and isn't collated. And it's actually also due to the Ofsted framework, in a sense that local authorities don't necessarily report on it either because it's frowned upon. So rather than look at how we can support and gather an understanding and implement measures in order to make a difference and prevent this, we've kind of created a culture of not reporting exactly how many of these are taking place. And certainly I'm aware of certain situations, even where it's short term, where that can be brushed over just because they kind of are worried about that backlash really from the regulators around that. So it's about how we can kind of support the system to be able to have those conversations openly and honestly in order to put the children first and not focus more on regulation, rating and making decisions based on what our rating may be or what a regulator may say, but actually trying to open up those flexible conversations with people in those regulators to be able to understand the challenges and the barriers local authorities and ICBs and health services are actually facing. But we have done a average calculation based on the amount of referrals we get children in this space, and the void, this void really of children up to the age of 18. And we have calculated based on the amount of local authorities and district councils there are and the amount of referrals we have had, there's probably on average nearing on 2,000, if not more, children currently in this predicament in the country. So what we're trying to help with, and we're working with a number of ICBs and local authorities around this, at looking at things holistically and what's working well and what we need to do better, is how we can bring everybody together in a really cohesive way. And everybody talks about co-production, integration, working in partnership quite a lot. However, we don't take account of all areas of the system or all sectors. So we've got elements of health and social care working quite well as a result of the NHS long-term plan and various integration policies and procedures that are coming into play around there. And then we've obviously got the education and social care elements that work quite well, working with children and young people at that level. We've got the private sector and the third sector, generally have always worked quite well. The public sector kind of sits in silo a lot of the time, but sort of dips into working with the private sector and the third sector as and when needed. And what we're trying to achieve is bringing together all the sectors, health, social care and education. And I've made education red on this slide because it's one that's always kind of left out a little bit or not fully integrated into those conversations. And it's really important because quite a lot of these difficulties that these young people are facing originate in education, or because the education system is potentially not fully effectively meeting their needs, which is another presentation altogether. So I won't get into that right now. So our model is a blended clinical and social model with the young person and the family at the centre of everything that we do. The clinical element of our model is the psychological theory behind it, and the social element of our model is the delivery element. We adopt a full biopsychosocial approach, so looking at the genetics, physical health, family history, gender, age, along with psychological elements, mental health, emotional health, personality, coping skills. We were having a conversation on this morning actually about looking at things via stage, not age. Social elements, environmental, housing, financial, social support, work, education, and the full family, looking at the whole situation holistically. Our model is a bespoke framework of delivery, unique to the young person's needs and the needs of their family. And the core elements of our model is that it's multi-agency and multi-model approach, and I'll come on to that a little bit more shortly. Adopting a full therapeutic approach, completely trauma-informed and underpinned by psychological theory and the biopsychosocial approach. So we want to flip the narrative, and a lot of the work that we do is around educating people within the system and the public. So rather than expecting young people to conform to outdated societal expectations, as they likely don't have the skills to, we want to work on changing the environments around them, as well as upskilling adults in their lives to meet their needs. Then you will naturally see the behaviours that challenge begin to reduce. And that's what we see time and time again, and have a full evidence base of that therapeutic approach and that understanding approach, and us changing how we approach them and the environments around them naturally reduces those behaviours and those crisis behaviours when they are very much in their primal brain. So the difference here between therapeutic modality and model of care. So therapeutic modality refers to a particular therapeutic model that has an evidence-based framework utilised to guide the application of a particular therapy to treat a particular disorder or difficulty. So many of you will recognise some of the therapies listed there: CBT, DBT, EMDR, so on. A model of care refers to the overall model of service delivery. So Great Minds Together is a therapeutic model of care, meaning that everything that we do is underpinned by a therapeutic understanding and way of working. A central component of the GMT model of care is creating bespoke packages of care and support for individuals. This may include the layering of one or more therapeutic modalities in addition to the Great Minds Together therapeutic approach. So our model of care is the overarching service plan inclusive of therapeutic approach, ethos, aims, core values, and the systems and processes that effectively translate these into practice. So that's all our different services, which is our full sufficiency agenda. So our Autism Central team, outreach and complex case team, Tier 3.5 and residential team. This just gives you a visual on how people can kind of move up and down our services dependent on their current need and presentation. Things happen. So lots of people in the system have an expectation that we have a process of getting better and then we're better. Obviously, that's how physical health generally works most of the time, hopefully, if things go well. But from a mental health perspective, that's not so much the case. So we need to make sure that our sufficiency agenda has ways in which we can move up and down those different layers and elements of support. Ideally, I said this earlier, but just to reiterate, the whole point of our outreach and Autism Central and complex case team is to try and prevent children ever reaching the Tier 3.5 level or being hospitalised or in a police station. And everything that we do is based on evidence. So we gather all of the evidence of the practices and the outcomes that we achieve, and we monitor them weekly in respect of making sure that the model is fully flexible and interchangeable where necessary, bespoke to the needs of the young people and families that we support. So this is just another visual that kind of gives you an overarching understanding of the model itself. So we have along the top there all of the different professionals that work within our model. So a full multidisciplinary team, professional volunteer initiative, and we've got some really good partners with universities for our graduate and internships schemes. We have the wraparound support for families. So there's a wraparound coordinator allocated to all of our families to help coordinate the system. And then mentoring, that may be for the young people, it may be for the family members themselves. Our wraparound support and our outreach service is completely free service, accessible in the areas of Greater Manchester and West Yorkshire currently. And we have a lot of data surrounding the benefits of that service, and particularly that being a free service to help the system itself in trying to provide support and helping with the capacity difficulties I've shown you earlier on the earlier slides, that social care are facing currently with referrals at the moment. And then there's a huge peer education focus there as well. So it delivers a full biopsychosocial approach, trauma-informed, which is our therapeutic model of care, and underpinned by obviously the assess, plan, do, review process, which is very in line with the education SENCO process, and also the social care elements of assessing and evaluating, understand the outcomes we want to achieve, and the plan on how we get there. And everything that we do is in partnership with parents and young people, and treating their voice as the priority, really. So this is just an overview of the phases of our model. So there are 5 different phases. I can provide details of this to anybody that may want the full detail of the phases, just to have a further understanding of it. But there's real thought out process based on evidence of what we've seen over the last 5 years of working on Tier 3.5 with these young people, and what works really well, and the themes that we've picked up that make such a difference to young people who are at that crisis level. So the how we achieve the sufficiency agenda is not just a change to the structure of services, but how the services are delivered and also how they are regulated. We are looking around the regulation at the moment, specifically around neurodivergent young people and mental health. A system-wide priority is to fully understand a therapeutic needs-led approach and why this benefits all children and young people. This just gives further information around our model of care. So the therapeutic model supports how we understand the individuals that we work with and their needs, as well as the ways of working to support their progression. This is then effectively translated into practice via the processes and frameworks stipulated in the model of care, focusing on the main areas being safety, relationships, trust, and opportunity. Our therapeutic approach mimics healthy childhood development, enabling us to understand needs from gaps in development and then create goals-based plans to effectively meet their needs and upskill them into adulthood. So many of us will just assume, based on our upbringing, that some of these young people should know and have various skills and understanding of the world, especially if you have come yourself from a very nurturing background and nurturing family. Some of the children and young people that we work with and that get to this level have never had that, may have never had somebody in their family that has given them a hug, may have never developed in a way that we see as usual, or that may just come naturally to us. So it's about remembering as professionals and adults that some of these children may just not even have the ability or the skills because they've never been taught them in the way that we were automatically by our families. So just understanding behaviour through an evidence-based model is our priority, centred on nuanced understanding of childhood development and relational neuroscience and the impact experiences of adversity can have on individuals' developmental trajectory. So a child's brain develops from a bottom up and is used dependent fashion through engagement with the world around them. Healthy development is underpinned by functional brain development, and it's reliant on healthy, attuned relationships with caregivers, which is what I was just referring to a moment ago. That's just a bit of a visual to help you understand that if you haven't heard that before. So we as human beings are relational beings. So just to drill down into this a little bit more. So we're reliant on each other for survival and for our well-being. And to develop socially, emotional, and psychologically, we need to move out of our lower cortical reason. So just going back here, just to show you what I mean. And this requires a sense of felt safety. We achieve true safety with attuned caregivers, and the relationships are the vehicle through which we grow and progress, and support with co-regulation to support the development of self-regulation. So just to understand that a bit more, there's a lot of expectation on our young people, particularly in education as well, of them being able to self-regulate, and the expectation of them being able to behave. And, you know, some schools doing things really well in respect of that and really therapeutically, but there is still very much an expectation on our young people. And we forget sometimes that they are still learning. And actually, there's a whole cohort of young people that may have never been taught those skills actually to self-regulate in their lifetime. They may have never had that nurture or those relationships with adults that we are so used to having had ourselves. So it's about understanding how we can support that co-regulation in order to support the development of self-regulation, because that's something that needs to be learned and taught, that isn't inherently known. So these early life experiences in key developmental stages are crucial as they shape how we see ourselves, how we interact with others, and how we understand and interpret the world around us. There's always a need behind behaviour. So many of the referrals for children we receive involve a level of behaviours that challenge, which may include externalised behaviours, behaviours that may cause harm to self, risk-taking behaviours, absconding attempts, internalisation, difficult to engage, children that are vulnerable to child criminal exploitation or child sexual exploitation, and maladaptive coping strategies such as substance abuse. Our therapeutic model shifts perspective from seeing behaviours as the problem to seeing behaviour as symptomatic of unmet underlying needs. And it's about understanding that all behaviour is a communication of a need. So the whole purpose of this particular programme and the sufficiency agenda and the model that we are talking about today is to try and support with the reduction of the number of neurodivergent people in inpatient units, and to prevent further wrongful admissions, to help people understand the differences between mental health difficulties as a result of unmet and unidentified need, and just being mindful that when we're pushing for those mental health act assessments and those tier 4 admissions, the hospital environments can actually exacerbate crisis behaviours, which prolong those admissions, which create institutionalisation. And actually what we need to do collaboratively is look at how we can provide something within the system for these children and young people to go to that is in line with their needs, and how we can come together to achieve that. And that's kind of starting the work that we're currently doing to try and create those spaces across a number of ICBs at the moment, where something does exist, where the system does recognise it and accept it, to be able to be provided for these children, young people, to prevent that crisis and that continuing. Because when we get to 18, obviously we've got the whole transitional into adults difficulties and that cliffhang, and that then causing more difficulties and increasing more needs, mental health needs, which is then more stretch on our NHS system, impacts our physical health, and obviously increases criminalisation, homelessness. I could go on all day about that, but it's if we get this right and stop preventing things from being available and actually start working together in a solution-focused way to create something that is recognised, accepted and understood, and all the sectors and regulatory bodies start working together, then we may be able to make some waves here in this space. Some takeaways. So just remembering all sectors, how do we work in partnership with everybody? We need to start thinking outside the box. It's never a no, it's when and how is it yes and who by. Let's try and move away from tick box processes that are not meeting the needs of these young people. Always positively challenge when something isn't right instead of just accepting that it isn't right. Never judge, always be solution focused. Always think in an integrated way. Make sure we're sharing good practice with other localities, because there's lots going on that's really positive in this space across different ICBs, different local authorities, some doing it really well, some doing it really wrong. So let's help the ones that are doing it really wrong instead of being so judgmental of that, and help that sharing that good practice. The biggest takeaway, to always remember there is always a need behind the behaviour. Always remember education and other sectors. The children and young people are 100% of our future. So let's try and do things differently to make sure that they have one. Thank you. That is the presentation. So I know Kelsey's been busy in the chat, and I think Jen wanted to come back on as well.
Jen. Yeah, will do. Hi, thanks, Em. That was absolutely brilliant. There has been a lot of questions, actually. Kelsey's answered loads of them, but there are still a few. I'm just going to direct people over to this page now. There's a Q&R code there. A QR code even, not Q&R. That will give you your CPD points for today. Thank you all so much for attending. I'm going to scroll back just quickly and have a look at some of these questions. If you want to do the same, Emma. I know that there's one here from Rianne that I don't think has been answered yet. How can accountability systems be improved to ensure hospitals and care providers are following best practices for neurodiverse children?
Let me find that. How can accountability systems be improved?
Click on Emma, have you got on the top of your screen, have you got something that's got the number 18 and then a question mark?
Oh, yes, I can see that now, yeah.
It should be the top one there.
I think the difficulty is with that is that the accountability systems don't need improving, they do exist. It's having the people and resource to enforce them and ensure that they are implemented and building those relationships. So I think obviously that's come from a specific experience around maybe the accountability systems not working in that area. So I'd just be interested to understand the context behind that question a little bit more, because they are there, and it really is, it's very much like the postcode lottery, isn't it? It's area dependent, and it goes back to talking about that sharing of good practice. So if there's something that's not working well in that area, understanding what that is, and then linking with other organisations or other areas of the system or other professionals to find out what is working well and where it's working well, and then trying to integrate that into the area that it's not doing.
Brilliant, thank you. We're going to try our best, guys, to get through these. We've got 15 minutes, but they are coming in thick and fast. Emma, do you want to scroll down to the bottom for me, please, of those questions? Because some of them will have been answered. If we start at the bottom, is this service available in London? That was actually answered by Kelsey.
Yes, so at the moment we're in conversation with a number of ICBs and local authorities around the expansion of our model. So it's currently the main focus has been Greater Manchester. Our Autism Central Hub has been Northwest focused, and we've also got a branch in West Yorkshire. There's certain elements of our service that are national and certain elements of service that are local. So we're just currently discussing with various ICBs how we can bring the full sufficiency agenda to areas outside of those that we cover. So the Tier 3.5 service is a national service. For example, we've got a complex case team, which is trying to keep families together, so preventing children being accommodated into the system, so an intensive team around the family and trying to keep the family at home. That's also a national offer. But our outreach service currently funded by National Lottery funding is Greater Manchester. So the full sufficiency agenda is available to ICBs and local authorities in partnership for conversation out of those areas at the moment, which is hence the presentation today.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm just having a look through. I know that Kelsey has answered a few of these. There's one here from Stephen. Have the revised MHA and potential amendments made the situation for autistic better or worse?
Well, it depends on which elements you're talking about. So some of it obviously is improvement, but there was quite a lot of it that has made it worse, specifically around the pressing on where they can and cannot go or be placed. That has been a real difficulty because that's happened alongside the changes to placement in residential and the Ofsted element. So it's almost like there's been no communication between people who are enforcing the Mental Health Act and people who are enforcing the Children's Act. And they've made lots of changes and prevented lots of things from happening, which has left these children in space with absolutely nowhere to go without it being illegal or without somebody breaking the law or without people having to kind of step outside what the legal framework is telling them that they can and can't do.
While you're on that, there is actually a question relevant to that. So it says, as you were talking about young people and police intervention, could you provide an age range for this, please?
So when I'm talking about young people, I'm talking about up to the age of 25. That's the cohort of young people we support. Obviously, in respect of wrongful criminalisation, I'm specifically referring to where there is an identified need and there is a misinterpretation and misunderstanding of behaviours. And actually, rather than focusing on trying to help with those behaviours and understanding the need behind those behaviours, those children and young people are being criminalised. And that's where we end up in a system with over 80% of neurodivergent people with unmet need in our prison service currently.
Gosh, wow. Do you screen young people for trauma to prevent misdiagnosis?
So the way in which we assess young people is completely holistically. So we look at the full developmental history and all life experiences, not just from themselves, but from their parents, carers, variety of other professionals, so that we can fully understand if there has been any trauma or if there may be some attachment difficulties as a result of experiences, to try and prevent misdiagnosis. So we're very mindful that there's definitely a lot of push around autism diagnosis and ADHD diagnosis, but some of those behaviours actually are very similar to the behaviours that present as a result of trauma and attachment difficulties, and that's something that we have lots of conversations with professionals about all the time as well. So very aware of it. Yeah.
There's another question that's sort of relevant. Does the model include support for people with substance use problems?
We support any difficulties if there's a neurodivergency or an identified need. We support holistically what's going on for that young person or family, and we support the parents and carers and siblings as well and the wider family network. So if there is substance abuse or there's difficulties with mental health, they can tap into our therapeutic support and have mentors. We've actually got substance abuse specialists, we've got a hypnotherapist, we've got a therapy that specialises in people that struggle with all of that. And it's just a full therapeutic, trauma-informed, non-judgmental model, basically.
Brilliant. The non-judgmental part is really important, isn't it?
Yes.
Is there any intervention programs for the well-being of caregivers? Or this is only, oh, sorry, somebody wrote one as I was reading. It jumps. Well, this is only for the autistic children and young people. Is the ACT intervention only for the children, or parents are also involved in the intervention?
So let me read that. So is there any intervention programs for the wellbeing of caregivers? So we do have, so the wraparound support service and the outreach service is for the caregivers as well. Actually, we spend most of our time with the caregivers in understanding their needs as well. Obviously, it's only for the autistic. No, it's for everybody. It's for the whole family holistically. Is the ACT intervention only for the children or parents? ACT intervention, I'm not sure what they mean by that. I don't know what the ACT intervention.
I'm presuming they mean maybe if, I don't know, maybe childminding
or our interventions. The answer is it's not called ACT. So I don't know if you've got, or do you mean complex case team potentially? But none of our interventions are for the children only. We cover the whole family always. So every time we get a referral for a young person, whether that's via outreach, complex case, or tier 3.5, we offer the wraparound support for the full family, parents and carers, as part of everything that we do is completely free service that the family can access.
Brilliant. You mentioned the impact of smartphones on CYP's mental health wellbeing. We know from the, sorry, I don't know what this word is, the height ETC's work on this, e.g. the anxious generation, that this is very significant. Is anyone exploring this in relation to neurodivergent young people and adults who are distressed and struggling?
Yeah, so there has been some recent data released by NHS England around the link with smartphones to an increase in diagnosis and assessment and neurodiversity. It's obviously quite a controversial topic because some of that would imply that the increase in information and devices has caused certain things that believed to be developmental and not causable. So it's worth kind of looking into the data. That I know there's some research studies that have been recently released, very interesting read, particularly the one around introduction of smartphones, increase in neurodiversity. So yeah, there is a lot of data being gathered. There's only a very small amount of studies currently available. I think it's going to take us years and years to be able to figure that one out. But there's definitely an impact from the smart devices. I mean, I think I read somewhere in one of the studies that the children of today, so before they're fully developed, they take in 86% more information in a day than we did when we were their age. So the amount of information that their brain is having to compute in comparison to what we did when we were their age is increased by 86%. So that's going to have an impact on the neurodevelopmental pathways of the brain and the young people growing up.
Of course it is. There's a great question here from Julie. She'd love to talk to you about the Northeast and whether it's something that could be delivered locally in the 13 areas. So I'll make sure, Julie, that the introductions are made there for you. That's no problem at all. We can do that after. That's one was working with places, institutions that are not working with us.
It's in the Northeast without her. So,
sorry, this one. We did answer a couple from Terry. Sorry, that wasn't actually a question. I think it was a response to something else he'd written. Which assessments do you use to understand developmental histories?
So we have a variety of different assessment tools, and we've got a variety of different assessment tools in our organisation, and it all depends on the young people and the family and the needs. Everything that we do is completely bespoke. So we've got a clinical psychologist, our clinical director, that oversees how we conduct our developmental histories and the conversations that we're having with families, and there's clinical supervisions that take place with all of our staff across the organisation.
That's great. I'm just trying to scroll back through them now because I know that Kelsey has answered quite a few. There are quite a few inquiries, Emma, asking about obviously if you can do it in their area. So we'll make sure that you get all of those. Just to direct people back, we're not providing the full slides from today, but in the handouts section, there is a services document there. There's also the CPD details there as well. Just going to go back on to the chat. There's quite a lot of people saying that they'd like to have a read of things, contact information. I can't actually see.
I'll pop our website in there as well, because there's a lot of information on there, and there's a lot of free resources on there as well. Quite a lot of the elements of our service are free, because we really want to be supporting the system financially, and also a lot of the work that we're doing at the moment, ICBs understand how to spend the funds effectively. Because obviously there's lots of funds being spent in lots of different areas, so we're doing lots of consultation work, and if we can't deliver something in the area that you are, or we potentially don't have the capacity, we can support you to utilise the systems that you've already got in order to try and deliver it yourself. So we're having lots of conversations around that at the minute as well.
That's really good. I've just gone back onto the chat. I've come away from the questions, and Gabby has actually come back to you saying, thank you for the answer, Emma. Yeah, can you see that?
Yeah, no, that makes sense now. Sorry, yeah, I thought you were referring to one of our interventions, but as a multimodal, and whatever's right for the children and family, we kind of don't stipulate anything that we will or won't work with, apart from a couple of therapies that we definitely as many will agree, don't think are appropriate for autistic people.
Okay, there's another question there about your services being available in Sandwell and Birmingham. There was another one for Scotland, so obviously I'll leave those. Anything that hasn't been answered today will be sent through to you guys over at GMT, and then we'll do a document that's got all the Q&A, and then that will be then sent to all registrants along with today's replay. But is there anything that you sort of want to, I'm just having a quick scroll now. Obviously Kelsey's been on all the way through it, so I think she's pretty much answered everything, which is great.
No, I think that's, our details are on the website. So if anybody wanted any further conversations, just feel free to get in touch.
Have you got anything to say about this? I don't understand why CQC service providers cannot be used for children. It works well in our area in the northeast. We are using some specialist providers really well, better than Ofsted providers.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, really, because different areas have different, and that goes back to what we were saying around the people over process, and it does work well in some areas, but there are other areas that local authorities are really reluctant to place with just CQC regulated provision because of the pressure then they get potentially from Ofsted, and some areas Ofsted and CQC work well together, others they don't necessarily. So it is a really tricky one, and it is like a postcode lottery, like anything that's the same with people and relationships and understandings, and that's all based on life experience potentially, and obviously a variety of different elements. But CQC obviously is a bit more appropriate, a lot more appropriate actually, in fact the most appropriate for the children at this level, because not only does it have a more therapeutic understanding and it's more health and mental health focused as a regulatory kind of, because it's obviously linked to the health service, but it's also into adults, so it's got the longevity and sustainability for the children who are placed. And I know that when there's DOLS hearings with judges, they actually prefer if you're going forward with a CQC registered provision as a plan, as a longer term plan, because actually there's going to be no fall off that cliff at 18 and have to find somewhere else again. It can go all the way into adulthood if necessary. So yeah, it's good to hear it's working well in your area. Maybe you could share that good practice with us, and we could share that in areas it's not.
Yeah, that'd be good. Do you cover Northern Ireland and Scotland?
Not at the moment, no. I mean,
the plans. You might need to now.
We can certainly have some conversations around that. Again, more about kind of supporting people to implement those changes and making use of things that are available currently in the best way and pull things together, because we're doing that with other areas at the moment to try and help them where there isn't available, because you've got lots of places with you know, some places have got access to loads of services and universal services and third sector organisations, but then you've got areas that don't have anything at all. So it's how we can support those areas to kind of make use of what they do have, or see if we can support other people to establish services that currently don't exist in those areas as well.
Brilliant. And I know that somebody did ask how many ICBs you were currently working with. I know you don't seeing an ICB at the moment, so obviously you're probably not going to share that information, but hopefully all of them would be the answer.
Not quite yet,
just about,
but yeah, some are
yeah,
more,
eventually.
more open to change than others.
God. Right, well, thank you so much for today. It's been brilliant. Is there anything that you want to add at the end there, Emma? It's been really good, thank you.
No, thank you, and thank you for just being so interactive, really, with all the questions and everything. It's been really good to see the interest in the work
Brilliant.
that we're yeah.
Yeah, well, I think at the strongest point during the hour, there was about 300 people live, which is fantastic for a live session. As I said earlier, everyone, you can get the handouts, you'll be sent the replay, and I'll just go back dead quickly before I close, just to those poll answers. So were they surprising or anything, Emma?
Let's have a look. Lots of not sures, which tells me that we need to do our job better at educating people as to why those questions are being asked in the first place. But yeah, I'm not surprised that they've come out as the top answers being yes. Yeah. And very little no. But the not sures is probably where we need to focus some of our time then.
Okay, perfect. Right, well, thank you everyone for attending today. Thank you, Emma. It's been really good. And as I say, all follow-ups will come. The replay will be sent within the hour. And we look forward to welcoming you again to the next webinar. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.